Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today with a video on Metro Exodus. Today we are going to be focusing on 10 bold changes coming to Metro Exodus. This information is courtesy of GameInformer.com, which I will have linked in the description down below. They are doing a month's worth of coverage on Metro Exodus, so do expect more Metro coverage this month compared to previous ones. Some of these quote bold changes are obvious information, but they are still dramatic changes for the series itself. But do know that there is brand new information on the title packed away in this article. Number 1, say goodbye to the Metro. Both Metro 2033 and Last Light took place in and under the Moscow Metro. As trailers suggest, this is no longer the case. After an introductory sequence in Metro, Exodus finds Artyom, his wife Anna, and the rest of the crew cutting through the Russian wilderness in search of hope. This means bigger spaces, dangerous new factions, and a new world of trouble for our survivors. So yes, as this part of the article indicates, we did see this information throughout the first ever trailer of the game. Number 2, Exodus is bigger, but it's not open world. This is a mistake that a lot of us, myself included, at the beginning of the announcement of Metro Exodus had made. During our studio visit, 4A Games pressed upon us repeatedly the importance of realizing that Exodus is not an open world game. Instead, Exodus is comprised of several huge sandbox levels that funnel in and out of the linear path of story missions, as well as side activities for you to find. Once you finish an area, you move on to the next one without any way to return to it. Still, the fly-throughs of the sandbox regions were impressive and diverse. The largest area in Last Light, according to 4A, was 200 by 100 meters, and Exodus's sandboxes stretched to 2 square kilometers. So these sandbox areas are big, but I think the biggest standout detail here is that you cannot return. So this is going to be very story focused. This isn't going to be a game where you beat the story and you can just go ahead and go wherever you want afterwards. No, you have to make sure you have all your jobs done before you move on to the next area, and I do like the idea of that. Number 3, the ammo economy is gone. In the previous Metro titles, you used military-grade ammunition to purchase weapons, upgrades for said weapons, and various tools like medkits. This made combat encounters tense and tactical, forcing you to decide if you want to sacrifice bullets to mow down the guards in your way was worth it, or if you should take a longer route and bypass your foes with stealth. But since you're not in the Metro anymore, the ammo economy is no longer a concern. Instead, that economy has been replaced by a scavenging system that seems more in line with recent Fallout entries, turning junk and valuables you find in the open world into resources, which are chemicals and materials. These can be used to craft tools and other valuable items. Prepare to seek out workstations littered around the map to craft precious ammo though. So I like the idea to some extent about the ammo economy being gone, but also, like this article mentions, it did bring about a tense nature to combat because those bullets that you got that you could use, for example, to spend actually did bonus damage. So sometimes it was a good risk reward mechanic. Granted, I think 90% of us said this isn't worth it. We hardly get enough of these as is, so we never ended up using them and just spending them. But still, I did like that, so I'm curious how they're going to balance it out. How often will we encounter these chemicals and materials to craft tools and other items? I do like the addition of crafting. I hope that doesn't become the core of the gameplay loop as we've seen in other games, that those types of side quests and so on can get a little bit tedious. But still, the ammo economy being gone, I'm a little up in the air about it, but right now, based off the changes they're making, I'm open to it. 4, combat has been enhanced. With Metro increasing its size, it makes sense for the game to expand its combat and stealth gameplay as well. While the classic flexible gameplay of Metro remains steadfast, letting players choose between stealth and gun-blazing action, 4A has complicated things in pleasing ways. You now have the option between lethal and non-lethal takedowns for foes, giving you a happy pacifistic medium between violent killing and completely bypassing enemies. The takedown animations are also now varied, with each animation depending on what weapon you're using, the speed of your approach, and where you are adjacent to the enemy. Beyond this expansion, the game also keeps tabs on your action. Mowing down members of one faction can result in them meeting you with open hostility should you run into them down the road. However, treating them with relative gentleness could make for friendlier run-ins. So I like this. The game remembers your actions. It's not a role-playing game by any means, but it's good to know that the world will recognize if you're a complete crazy murderer version of Artyom, that the factions will react just that way. Also, the addition of lethal and non-lethal takedowns, that sounds cool for additional playthroughs. If that is worthwhile in this game, we shall see. But overall, they're just expanding on a system that was already working, and to me, that's good news. 6. You use vehicles. 4A Games told us there would be vehicles for the players to commandeer during their journey, though the studio was tight-lipped when it came to saying what kind of vehicles. Outside of the Aurora, we saw Artyom row a boat across the lake, but that was the only player-controlled vehicle we witnessed during the gameplay demonstration. So this makes sense. The areas are bigger, they don't want you trekking back and forth across these huge areas, so naturally they're going to add vehicles. What kind they are, we don't know. Will they just be a bike? Will it be a car? Who knows, but I do like the idea of this because if we're going to be doing side quests and trekking all over this location, running back and forth might take some time, and then you end up having a situation like Thief on your hands for the Xbox One and PS4, where the areas were so complexly constructed that going back and forth for side quests became very tedious. So as long as the areas are opened up and actually enable usage of vehicles, this can be a good change. Number 7, the game takes place over a year. 2033 and Last Light took place over the course of a few days. Exodus's journey instead occurs over the course of a year, with each sandbox encompassing a season. The fall level takes place in a gorgeous mountain setting filled with the mutant bears, while summer takes place in a deserty environment with burning oil platforms on the coast that gives off a bit of a Mad Max vibe. So first of all, one of the locations we actually did see, but that burning Mad Max vibe actually sounds really interesting and completely different from anything we have seen in the Metro series. So I'm very curious to see how they actually environmentally design that area. But seeing that this game takes place over a year, I wonder how exactly this story will pan out. All this has left me with is a lot of curiosity. And now we move on to number 8. Weapon upgrades are different. Whereas previous games had you buying upgrades and discovering weapons in the field with unremovable attachments, Exodus makes things a little more relaxed and stressful at the same time. If you come across a weapon in the world that has a scope or a clip extender you want, but you don't want the weapon it's attached to, good news, you can remove it and use it with a compatible gun in your inventory. A lot of attachments are available for your guns: scopes, barrels, stocks, magazines, and attachments. However, weapon upkeep is now something to be concerned about. If you don't visit your workstation enough to perform maintenance on your gun, it can become unclean. They never stop working completely, but when the guns get dirty, they eject literal dirt from the barrel and suffer a stats hit to damage and accuracy. I like this change a lot. I like it a lot. It's realistic, it makes sense, it doesn't completely jam up your gun where the gameplay gets ruined over it, but I like the idea of being flexible enough to remove these attachments from different guns and put them on other ones. It's a trade-off compared to what we've had in different entries of the series, where, like the article mentions, we see that we can pick up these weapons with unremovable attachments, and those are considered upgrades in those levels, where, for example, we can find an assault rifle with a 2x scope, take that off, put it on my sniper rifle, and use that for a little bit instead. But then you have to keep up with your weapons and make sure you're taking good care of them. Number 9, there are side excursions. While lacking the typical side quest giver interaction that defines side quests, 4A says it's creating a wealth of activities for each area for players to find as they explore. Players can learn about these quests by reading notes found in the world, talking to characters, or overhearing conversations. Going off the beaten path could lead to a firefight with bandits in a farm or a house filled with supplies, as well as some corpses that could have betrayed one another shortly after they drew their last breath. So, side activities, quests, more stuff to collect, more stuff to do, expanding beyond the general Metro formula. Right now, I'm really liking this because all of these changes they're making aren't losing a sense of series identity. They are just expanding upon the gameplay mechanics, and I think in good ways. This is another one that I'm a big fan of. I like the idea of actually having side excursions. The fact that they're not saying side quests is a little bit peculiar to me. But once again, when they're talking about we're learning about these quests by reading notes or talking to characters or overhearing conversations, it seems like a more world interaction style of finding quests that we see in a lot of games. So this is good in my book. Finally, number 10, the factions are more self-contained. Whereas the factions in 2033 and Last Light formed a tightly interconnected and often hostile community, Exodus has factions that live in isolation from one another that you encounter. During our gameplay demo, we ran into a group of religious fanatics that worshipped a massive fish living in a nearby lake. Artyom's actions toward each faction, namely whether he responds with violence or pacifism in their initial meeting, will define his relationship to each. And I do wonder if this will impact the story in some way. I'm not talking different endings and stuff like that, but let's say that in this story you interact with this faction who is obsessed with this massive fish, and you ended up killing a bunch of their people earlier on in the story. How will they respond, and will there be a transformation in the story because of those actions, because they're going to respond in a more hostile faction to you? Or does that mean that regardless of what path you take, they'll end up taking that hostile response to you just later on in the story. But those are 10 brand new details, 10 bold changes coming to Metro Exodus. A lot of new information here. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this in the comments down below, so fire away, ladies and gentlemen. Other than that, be sure to follow me on Twitter, like me on Facebook. Those links are in the description down below, along with my Patreon. Do consider supporting that as it fuels all the content we create here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.